Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the importance of listening to your connective tissue. And this is one of those things that I see a lot of guys on YouTube not promoting correctly. It's one of the most dangerous things you see guys out there doing, and that's always, well, my tendons in my elbow hurt. They'll claim it's their elbow hurt, so they'll just put sleeves on their elbows. Or they'll put sleeves on their knees because their patellar tendon is getting inflamed. And if you guys know where I'm going with this, you already know that that is in the long term going to lead to injury. It's going to lead to constant pain for those people because they're assuming that if they put something tight on it, it's keeping it warm, when in reality it's just slightly reducing blood flow. Now, if you have reduced blood flow to an area that you're injuring all the time, guess what? Yeah. You just don't feel the pain as much while you're continuing to damage it, inflame it, things like that. Now for me, I'm experiencing a little bit of tendon pain in one of my bicep tendons. Interestingly enough, I had taken a few weeks off from chin-ups and had gone back over to pendlay rows, if you guys remember. And then I switched back to chin-ups as my primary pulling accessory to go with my deadlift. And within a short period of time, I'm going to say within about a week and a half, I started experiencing pain in that tendon. And I tested it out again yesterday because I bench pressed completely pain-free. No problem at all. Had deadlifted the day before, completely pain-free. And so I decided to go for my chin-up bar and just hang from it with the underhand grip, because the overhand grip doesn't hurt it. And I like to hang from my chin-up bar just to get a stretch on my shoulders as part of my overall shoulder mobility. And guess what happened? I gripped it underhand grip and held onto it, and I felt a slight tinge there. And I pulled myself up just about an inch out of the dead hang, and I felt a little bit of pain through there again. So what did that tell me? That tendon is inflamed. It is the bicep insertion that's inflamed. And that's the thing that gets tricky. You know, you deal with something like the elbow. You could have up to 4 different muscles heads attaching right there at that one point, and figuring out, is it a muscle in your forearm? Is it a tricep? Is it a bicep? What's causing that inflammation? It can be pretty tricky, can't it? So the thing is, for me, I've torn that bicep before. Many years ago, I tore it deadlifting by ignoring pain in a tendon. Now, it wasn't that exact spot where I tore it, interestingly enough, but I tend to be leery of that sort of thing, and the reason I do chin-ups is why. It's the reason I do chin-ups, to help reduce the chance of bicep tears. But in this case, I'm finding, because this had happened before, that tendon had been hurting me before when I was doing greasing the groove on chin-ups. Well, even now, just doing chin-ups after my workouts, within 5 workouts of doing my chin-ups when I get home every day after my 4 big workouts as an accessory movement, I started experiencing that again. And so that's telling me that at this point in my life, doing chin-ups 4 days a week is not working for my connective tissue. Now, I hate it when people say stupid stuff like everyone is different, because the only thing that's different is going to be your recovery. The only thing that's different is going to be your muscle growth, because people love to use that to make silly excuses as to why big, heavy exercises don't work for them. Because I can tell you, it doesn't matter who you are. Plenty of coaches have trained everyone from high school football players seeking a scholarship up to 60-year-old grandmothers who just want to get stronger and get healthier and fitter. Heavy squats, heavy presses, heavy pulling works for everybody. It works for everybody. Doesn't matter who you are. So everyone is not that different. We're all human beings. But the thing is, when it comes to recovery and connective tissue, what your connective tissue can handle before it gets inflamed, now that is different from person to person. When do overuse injuries occur? At what training volume, what training load, what exercises cause the most inflammation? Because I've told you guys before, a lot of times, the biggest cause of elbow pain is doing tricep extensions to where you bring the bar to your face. Instead of behind your head, bring it to your face, right? One of the leading causes of inflammation and eventual tendonitis in the tricep tendons, making your whole elbow hurt, making guys have to go put sleeves over their elbows. All right, that's what's causing it. But there are people who get away with it for 15, 20 years without that happening. Yet other people can start doing that exercise, and within 6 months' time of doing it, will develop tendonitis that they will have for the rest of their life. Those are the two extremes. Most people are somewhere in between. So the point is, there is individual differences as far as connective tissue inflammation and things like that, and certain exercises will aggravate certain people more than others. Certain amounts of excessive pushing will aggravate certain people's tendons more than others. Now in this case, I've had to step back and say, okay, I've got to reevaluate this. Now, what do you do when you have a tendon that starts hurting? Usually, if it's just one tendon, you might be able to get away with just laying off the exercises for a little bit that cause it, right? In other words, if your tricep tendons start to hurt, you probably need to stop all your pressing and all your tricep work for about a week until the inflammation goes away. Get in there, do some massaging it with your fingers, get in there deep, rub the tendon a little bit, get a little blood flow to it. Maybe some light active recovery with bands. But the point is, you have to back off of that connective tissue. Now, other times you need to take a full deload. In the case of when I tore my original bicep, I had nagging aches and pains all through my body. I was getting a lot of pain, worse than I'm getting now through that area. But here's the thing. I didn't listen to my body. I was young. I was using gear that made me feel invincible. I was in my 20s. I deadlifted 600 pounds for reps every week. I didn't care. I was invincible until that bicep snapped. So that's the thing. You don't see enough young guys being taught this, and you don't see enough YouTubers out here who are promoting all the hardcore training telling them that when you have things that start to hurt, you have to deload, or you have to cut exercises out, because things are eventually going to snap. And it's ironic that I remember Lobliner had brought a guy on who was showing, I've torn this. This guy was wearing it as a badge of honor that he had like 7 different tears. That's not a badge of honor. That's a badge of stupidity. It's a badge of stupidity. You've torn 7 muscles. But here's the thing, guys. Muscles very rarely tear in isolation. I'm not going to say never. Because there have been people who experience no pain anywhere, and bam, they just snapped a bicep, or they tore a tricep. All right, that does happen, but that's the exception to the rule. Do you want to know what usually precedes tearing a muscle? The tendons of that muscle getting inflamed and hurting. Hurting when you're not training, not just when you're lifting, but when you're not training. Now, if it's hurting when you're lifting, you need to stop right there. Because you're something going on to where you're directly aggravating and irritating that tendon. And usually that's what's up with joints. People think they have a joint that hurts. No, you don't. It's the tendons around it. It's not your knee joint. It's not your elbow joint. Now your shoulder, it's possibly a torn labrum, a torn rotator cuff, or they're really irritated and you need to get that assessed. Shoulder is a totally different animal. That really needs to be assessed by a specialist. But usually it's connective tissue, and connective tissue hurts from overuse. And eventually that is what causes a muscle tear. So that's the thing. I would say probably 90% of muscle tears are preceded by 1, 2, 3, 6 weeks of connective tissue pain, and a person not listening to their body and knowing they need to back down a bit, realizing maybe my whole training system needs a deload for a week. And I classify a deload as reducing your weight by 50% and possibly reducing volume further. So in other words, if you're doing 4 sets of 8 with 200 pounds, you need to cut down to 3 sets of 8 with 100 pounds per week. Deloading or taking exercises out. In my case, I'm going to have to evaluate, because this is twice this has happened, that I'm feeling that connective tissue pain, of how badly do I need to keep chin-ups in versus putting in something that never aggravates it. I don't ever get that from, say, a pendlay row. So again, it's time to sit back and assess it and go, does the bicep get so much extra stimulation from my chin-ups that I need to do it instead of the pendlay row, or do I need to rotate the pendlay row back in? This is the stuff that we have to assess. But in the meantime, until that connective tissue inflammation is gone, I'm not going to be doing that. It's not hurt on any of my 4 basic lifts, but my primary accessory movement, my chin-up, seems to be inflaming it. And that's what all of us have to do. We have to step back and assess that and say, okay, if I'm getting connective tissue pain, I'm clearly doing something wrong with either my exercise selection, my frequency, my workload, my volume, or my execution of the lift. All right, and it needs to be addressed. Because if you keep getting connective tissue inflammation doing something, if it happens 2 or 3 different times doing the same thing, that's when we have to step back and say, okay, I need to really address this. I need to change something, because if you're getting multiple inflammations of the same tendon over the course of a year, there's something wrong with your training, because you can't train with that. You can't make that work. You can't make that work, because every time it gets inflamed, you might be taking a week off or longer from doing productive exercises, and that is not how you make gains. That's not how you make gains. If you're having to take 5 or 6 weeks off every year from training a basic movement pattern due to connective tissue inflammation, I promise you, you're shortchanging yourself for that year. And if you keep doing it with the inflammation, you're eventually going to tear something. So that's when we have to step back and really assess what we're doing at an individual level and say, okay, something here isn't working for me. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.